Hello F11 members and welcome to the Fundamentals of Post-Production video tutorial for issue 69, October 2017. On the screen in front of you, open in Photoshop, I have a picture shot just last weekend on the Yorkshire Dales Capture to Print workshop on the limestone pavement up above Malham Cove. Beautiful scene, beautiful lighting. Well, we had some great light, as you can see, some real interest in the sky. And what I've done is tried to capture a scene which balances the impact of the limestone pavement in the foreground with the rolling countryside beyond, and of course the sky. On the left you see the picture straight out of the camera. Not bad, but a little bit flat and lacking in sparkle. And so I'm going to talk you through how I did the post-production on this picture. And I could take you into Lightroom, which I'm going to do now, and show you how to process that picture all in Lightroom. But often I like to actually do it another way, i.e. optimize the image here. If I open my selected image in Develop module, optimize it for the three different areas of the image, the limestone pavement in the foreground, the landscape and the sky. Make three different raw conversions, each optimized for each of those areas of the picture, and then combine them in Photoshop. I find that gives me a lot of scope for really sort of fine-tuning the contrast in each area of the picture. So let's get started here. And the first thing I'm going to look at is the landscape. So I'm going to come down here, and as I do so often in these post-production video tutorials, just look at my black and my white points, ignoring the sky and the foreground, just the landscape. So if I hold down the Alt key and come right on the white slider, I'm ignoring those highlights which are starting to clip there in the sky, and I can go all the way to about +70 before I start clipping highlights in the landscape. I'll just pull it back a little bit to +60 there, and now I'm going to do the same with the blacks, and again ignoring the clipping down the bottom, but I mean I can go about that far without losing, about -25, without losing anything in the landscape. Okay, and now I'm going to just pull back the brightness in the landscape there using my tone curve until I've got round about there. And then I'm just going to boost my shadows a little bit for this area down here. And that's looking pretty good. The image is already sharpened because that was done at import. I've got just a teaspoonful of vibrance in there. I need to be careful that I don't go over the top with that. And I'm now just going to export that and open in Photoshop. So if I go Library, Export, and you can see down the bottom here it says Open in Photoshop, and let's do that. So there's the image open in Photoshop, but I'm going to go back into Lightroom now, and now just work on the picture here, the same picture, but go through the same process, just looking at my foreground, the limestone pavement there. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key here on my whites, and I can go even further with them, just a little bit there. And I'm going to look at my blacks again. I don't think that will change, but just a few shadows in the darkest part of the Clints and Grikes there wouldn't be a bad thing. And now I'm just going to pull down the density there in my foreground there, because I don't want that to be too bright. It was in shade, so it would look unrealistic if it were too bright. And now I'm going to do the same thing. Export and open in Photoshop. So let's do that. And there it is, that image open in Photoshop. You can see it looks pretty lurid and too bright on the landscape, but my foreground interest looks pretty good there, and that's all I'm concerned with there. Now let's go back into Lightroom again and go through the same process, but just looking at the sky here. So I'm going to pull my whites right back until there's no clipping anywhere. And I'm going to come left on my blacks as well. Hold down the Alt slider. Come right the way back with my blacks. I'm not concerned about any of those clipping shadows there. And I'm just going to put in the merest hint of dehaze there to tackle some of that dehaze in the distance there. Just the merest touch. Let's go for about +7. And just come back and tweak my sky again. It needs to go a bit darker, so I'll pull that back there. And come back on my highlights as well to pull some of those brightest parts in the sky down. I want it to be too dark. Okay, that's looking about right there. So again, I'm going to go through the same process, export and open in Photoshop. So here I have my 3 images open in Photoshop. You can see there the darkest one, the sky image. Then I have this image here, the foreground image. And then I have this image here, the landscape. I'm going to use the landscape image as the base. And now I'm just going to select the foreground image here. And I'm going to use my action that I've made here called Select, Cut and Close, which just does, as it says, it selects all the images, cuts it and closes it. So let's play that. So that selected that and closed it. And now if I go to paste and play that action there, I could just go Command V, exactly the same thing, play that, it's going to paste that image on the top there. Now so what we've got now is, if you look in the layers palette on the right, the 2 images dropped on top of each other. I'm now going to go to my sky image and do exactly the same thing. Select, cut and close, play that selection and paste it on top. Okay, so now you can see here in my layers palette I've got the 3 images. The sky on the top, the darkest. If I flick the eye off, I can hide or see that layer. Underneath that, the foreground layer and then the background layer, which is the landscape itself. So for the moment, I'm just going to flick the eye off on the landscape mode. And what I want to do is just make a selection here on the foreground image, the foreground layer, and then apply a layer mask so I can see only that bit of this image which I want to, which is the limestone pavement in the foreground. So to do that, I'm going to use my lasso tool and draw along the edge of the pavement here. So just using lasso there to draw along the edge of the pavement here. I can be relatively accurate, but of course I'm going to feather this selection, so I don't need to be too concerned about the accuracy. I have to say, for doing this sort of work, I find my graphics tablet so useful. I really struggle to process images and do this kind of work just with a mouse, but I guess it comes down to what you're used to. Now I'm going to play this action here, and I'll be going through actions, by the way, in a future edition of the workflow series. And I'm going to play, excuse me, this mask here called Mask 150, which applies a mask with a feathering of 150 pixels, a relatively soft edge, but not the super softest, because I've got a fairly defined line here. So play that selection, and it's going to apply a layer mask So if you look here on that mid layer there, there's a mask being applied, and the white shows the area that we can see of that image, just the limestone pavement, and the black, the area that is hidden. And now, so that's done a really nice job. You can't see the transition between the landscape layer and the pavement layer. So let's do the same using the sky layer now. I'm going to turn the eye back on so I can see it, and I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to use the lasso tool here to select the area of the image that I want to see. So just below the horizon here, I'm going to pull that area in, come across here, and now I'm going to do the same, but I'm going to use a much softer edge to the mask here. I'm going to go for a 500 pixel edge, which will give me a very soft transition there between sky and landscape, and play that selection. And there you have it. I have the sky, the landscape, and the foreground layer all merged beautifully with no join really seen there. So now I can come along and fine-tune each individual layer. So I'm going to start with the landscape layer there and come up here, image, adjustments, curves, and it brings this dialog up. And I'm just going to look at the landscape there and decide whether to just add in a little bit of contrast, maybe with a slightly more darkness and just a touch of a S curve to give a touch of contrast there. That's worked nicely. I'll click on OK. Maybe it's just a touch heavy-handed. Pull that back. Subtlety is, of course, the key after all. Click on OK there, and now I'm going to select the foreground layer, which is my limestone pavement. I think it's looking a little bit too bright. The image looks, dare I say it, a touch HDR-ish. Heaven forbid. It's not, of course, but I think it looks a bit too bright, that limestone pavement in the foreground, so I'm just going to darken it down a bit so it looks more realistic. So I've come to curves, and I'm just going to pull that curve down just a touch to give me a bit more dark, make that pavement a bit darker there. Realism is what we're after, believability, something like that. The limestone pavement was in shadow while the landscape beyond was in sunlight, so we need that balance to look right. Okay, a bit more maybe. Something like that, I think. Looks real. Okay, click on OK. And again, I can fine-tune my sky now, so if I come up here to Image Adjustments, Curves again, and now I look at that sky, I could pull it back and make it go darker. I think that's looking a bit too heavy, too much really. In this case, I'm not going to do anything. I think the sky is just right as it is. So I'll cancel that. Take a final look at my picture, and I think it's looking pretty good. There's one thing that I do need to do. If I just zoom in on the image here, you can see down here in this area of the picture, there's ugly cars and nonsense going on there. So I'm going to use my lasso tool here and just draw around that image there. There's a sort of shed and some derelict cars, what looks like. Just select that area. Now if I come up here to Edit and Fill, comes up with this ContentAware Fill. I'm just going to click on that. Before that, I just realized I'm not on the right layer. Very easy to get confused here, and so in that case what I'm going to do is, because I've finished with my layers, I'm going to flatten the image there. So I play my selection again, flatten the image. We're all one layer now. Now I come up to Edit, Fill, and ContentAware Fill, and just click on OK there and let Lightroom do its stuff. And you can see it's taken out that offending shed and car. Very clever, isn't it? It's not a fail-safe solution, but in this case it's worked brilliantly. So I deselect that, zoom back out. I will of course need to look at the image, or rather Wendy will need to look at the image full screen at 100% to check for imperfections, but there you go. I think that's done a good job on the processing of that image, and I like to do it this way often. I think it gives me real control. Okay, I hope that has been of use, and there's a workflow video in this edition as well, talking you through how to make your selections using Lightroom. Okay, keep your suggestions coming in, F11 members. See you next month.